And now we will proceed towards our first panel, Resolving and Managing Conflict, with Dr. Talal Iraqat as his first moderator.
The Arab American University today has the great pleasure of announcing the news of our new Policy and Conflict Resolution Studies Center. The PCSC at the AAU will be working together with the most famous conflict resolution institutes and peace studies centers around the world. The center is expected to fill the gap for researchers by introducing a forum that brings together researchers from around the globe. The center will also stand as a think tank to help provide policymakers with advice and recommendation based on policy analysis. As a result, the Policy and Conflict Resolution Studies Center is committed to fill the research gap into the Palestinian political life and to serve the Palestinian national interests by trying to work in harmony with the political decision-making quarters. Today, this seminar comes under the umbrella of the center. And the first panel will be focusing on conflict resolution, the second will be focusing on identity. Let me start by welcoming the panelists on this session, Mr. Martin Luther King, Dr. Johnny Mack, Dr. Ahmed Azem, and Dr. Fakhra. Allow me, before we start, to say a couple of words about conflict and conflict resolution. Well, conflict, my dear audiences, is inevitable in our lives. And in an attempt to define conflict, I could say any conflict, whether it is on the personal level or the political level, requires 2 or 3 parties. They have a number of interests, desires, or needs. And then when one party expresses that need or interest to the other party, and when that need is not met, then the conflict arises. We have many schools of conflicts, and we have many scholars for conflict resolution, naming Matlab, Peter Palestine, Fisher, Lederach, Gorton, and the Harvard School of Negotiation. Let me also elaborate on the differentiation between conflict and disputes. My dear friends and audiences, every conflict is a dispute, but not every dispute is a conflict. And if you look at the terminology for conflict and conflict resolution, we have 2 different schools. One is interdisciplinary, which I personally believe in, and here we have different terminology, naming conflict prevention, conflict settlement, conflict management, conflict resolution, conflict termination, and conflict transformation. Allow me now to give the floor to our first speaker, Mr. Martin Luther King, where we gave him the title of the role of the international community in resolving the conflict. Each panelist now will have 10 minutes for his intervention. The participants will be followed with a 30 minutes Q&A session. So please feel free to write down any comments or questions to be done afterwards. Thank you very much. Please, Mr. Martin. Allow me to say a couple of words on you before you start, sorry. Where Martin Luther King is the famous American human rights advocate and community activist, as we all know, but he is the oldest living child of civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr., who with the love transformed reality and human rights in the United States of America. He had a dream, and his dad has a dream. We the Palestinians, we also have a dream. The Palestinian prisoners have a dream. The Palestinian people have a dream. And with love, hopefully change will come to our reality, and hopefully hope will come back to our streets. Please.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Oh, thank you very much. Let me first say I'm honored to be on this panel with all of the distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I don't need to take a lot of time in terms of 10 minutes since you just heard an extensive presentation by me, but what I will say is that as a child, watching my father provide leadership to very difficult and complicated issues caused me to really learn and ultimately, as an adult, to embrace that philosophy that we call nonviolence, sort of teaching us how to live together without destroying either person or property. In my presentation, I talked about the respect and dignity of all humanity. And that means that each of us in our world should be treated with dignity and respect and civility. And so, in this context, I think that the hope, and really I am really excited about this School of Conflict Resolution here at the Arab American University, because students will begin a process of evaluating what in the modern civil rights movement can and cannot be used as it relates to the conflicts that you have to experience every day. This is very, very exciting to me, and it's certainly work that I've been involved in probably most of my adult life. And while I don't know that any of us currently will see the end of conflicts in our world, at least we can resolve some of these current conflicts. I know that it takes only a few good women and men to bring about change. I think my father and his team showed us that during the modern civil rights movement. Yes, we saw a picture earlier today of the March on Washington, where he delivered that speech that most or many know, called I Have a Dream. But that was a manifestation of over 250,000 people. But I must remind you that most of his victories were just a few good women and men that created those victories. When they marched from Selma to Montgomery to grant the right to vote for people of color, it really, for that march, there were only maybe 60 or 75 people who made that whole journey. Selma, Montgomery is about 48 or 50 miles. I'm not sure what that is in kilometers, but maybe you know. But it's a decent distance. And yet, that march of those 75 people caused the nation to say, we must grant the people the right to vote. And the president at that time, Lyndon Johnson, signed the Voting Rights Act in 1965. There were many other struggles, not just the right to vote, that my father and his team were able to create victories. But again, it was not always the masses. So my only point here is that it really is a small group of people that can bring about change. Yes, it manifested itself in the March in Washington, but there were many other victories that we may not get the same level of public relations so that the world knows about them. So I just wanted to share that, and I look forward to speaking again. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you so much for inviting us to be a part of this effort, and may God bless each of you always.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for focusing on dignity and humanity, and for reminding us all that individual roles matter. It only takes people like us to have intentions, and hopefully we'll bring change ourselves to our country and to our people. Allow me now to introduce Dr. Johnny Mack. Dr. Johnny Mack, his academic work is focused on Dr. Martin Luther King's logic of nonviolence and its application in the 21st century of conflict resolution. Dr. Mack is the president of the Drum Major Institute, an organization founded by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He is founder of Communities Without Boundaries International. Dr. Mack work focuses on peace and development using the philosophy and principles of nonviolence. Please.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to each of you. As it's a bit intimidating to, maybe twice over, to sit and talk to a group such as yourselves, to speak about Martin Luther King Jr. Is itself intimidating enough, as if one fully understands the great mind of such a great people. But then to sit with his son, who bears his name, and then once again to feel that one can interpret the incredible logic of King is no small notion. But it is a challenge for all of us to understand Dr. King's logic of nonviolence and its relevance and efficacy to the challenges and opportunities that we face today, whether it is here in this region or globally. And so when we think about conflict resolution in King, I think one of the challenges is to fully understand King's logic itself. I think too often we misunderstand King and what he's really trying to do, what he's trying to say to all humanity. I think Mr. King spoke to it well in his remarks just now and earlier, that King is thinking about the broader scope of human interaction and the social frameworks that mediate human interaction, that those social frameworks are resilient, that they themselves become the challenge and the opportunity for making sustainable, lasting, durable change. You know, people come and go, but the institutions and frameworks that we establish tend to survive us. And if you can inculcate within those institutions and frameworks a particular ideology, a particular understanding, a particular narrative, they tend to drive and inform and instruct our behavior. They tend to determine how we think, and therefore they tend to determine how we act. It seems then, if we can change the way we think, we can change the way we act. And how do we think? Once again, if the frameworks, the institutional, the organizational processes that inform and instruct our action individually and our interactions in groups are infused with a value system that we can collectively embrace, then indeed we can change the way we think, and indeed we can change the way we act. I think that is part of the message of Dr. King. And so therefore, he calls for what? A revolution of values. King, again, is arguing that there's something fundamentally wrong with the values that have shaped those political, social, cultural, economic, and other institutional frameworks, whether they are local, whether they are regional, whether they are state or internationally, whether they're global. As Martin King III has said to us, Dr. King understands that those values are basically three. Now, we are here talking about conflict resolution. And how far away am I in my 10 minutes? I've only gotten started. If King is concerned about dignity and worth, he's concerned about the freedom of each and every individual to exercise that dignity and worth. And so we have dignity and worth, we have freedom, but he also understands if I am to express my dignity and worth with my own freedom, that dignity and worth extends only as far as yours begins. How then do we manage this process of ensuring that each of us has an unfettered and equal opportunity? Now think about this. Again, whether we're talking about states or local communities or interaction, I'm sorry. or interaction between each of us as individuals. If we can embrace that fundamental value that my dignity is equal to yours, that my freedom extends as far as yours and yours as far as mine, we then have something exceedingly important, as King understood it, I think. If I'm by myself, remember now, we're talking about how to resolve conflicts. If I'm by myself, the only conflict is with myself. But as soon as you come into the picture, that conflict becomes a conflict of community, which is that third element of King's idea of a revolution of values. How can we infuse within our institutional frameworks an idea of freedom, dignity, and community? This is the challenge. And then I want to make one other point. Do I have a couple more minutes? Just a couple. The question is, how does that infusion take place? What is the practical means of infusing within our structural interactions this idea of recognizing dignity and worth, irrespective of religion or ethnic origin or gender or any other designation, characterization of our humanity? Well, there are three. One is direct action. Direct action is a means of directly acting upon and seeking to change an injustice or an inequality that one might confront, that imposes upon one's dignity, freedom, and worth, and destroys community. Mr. King mentioned another earlier today, and it has to do with cultural action. And what is that cultural action? Resolving conflict is also about addressing the cultural frameworks that legitimize the institutions and the behaviors that drive how we interact with each other. It's a form of cultural action. I hope you'll ask questions about that. The third very tangible way, and we don't often see these as tangible, but the third tangible way of acting is how we incorporate within the structures or structural action. These are forms of nonviolent action, nonviolent logic that have not been fully understood in Dr. King's broader framework of nonviolence. How do we, King says, and with this revolution of values, get these values into our institutions and structures and systems and policies and processes that determine the political, social, economic, and cultural frameworks that shape our societies? If we can spend the time in a school like this marvelous new institution, thinking about this framework in that way, we can move from the direct confrontation and think more structurally and institutionally about those forms that instruct our behavior individually and collectively. And through that process, this argument goes, we can resolve conflict in new and innovative ways. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Knight.